Once upon a time, in the quiet village of Uturu, lived a woman who had been pregnant 10 times without a child. She was now heavily pregnant again, but something happened that no one could ever explain. It was a calm and warm afternoon, a day like no other, with a calm breeze moving through the entire village as the people went about their activities, not knowing what laid ahead. The young woman, whose name was Ndidi, went into early labor. The first push hit like a thunderbolt in her body as the midwives did all they could to guide her to safe delivery. Her screams rang through the compound, slicing through the peace like a blade, sweat drenching her entire body as she continued to push hard, feeling the pain coursed through her body as she let out a loud scream. The baby slid out of her, and silence filled the entire room. No cry, no movement, no heartbeat, as the midwife looked down at the baby in her arms, hoping that it wakes, but nothing happened. So she looked up at the mother and broke the sad news to her that her baby was dead. Ndidi let out a heart-wrenching cry. She could not believe that her baby was dead. 10 babies dead in less than 10 years. She stared at the midwife in disbelief, her chest rising and falling rapidly, and for a moment it felt as though she had forgotten how to breathe. Then came the deep, long scream, filled with a kind of sorrow that no one had ever seen. Ndidi cradled her lifeless baby in her arms, her tears pouring down her face as the midwife stood back and watched. Her husband Tochi knelt in the dust outside their hut, pounding his fist into the earth as he cried out in grief. His wife Ndidi carried the baby in her arms as she walked out of the hut, collapsing onto the bare ground. Her body shook with sobs as she raised her eyes to the sky and cried out.
Oh heavens! Give me back my child! You have taken 10 from me. Please let this one stay.
The villagers gathered as they watched the sad scene unfold before their eyes. Suddenly, dark clouds began to form in the sky, and the air grew thick and heavy. Lightning crackled across the heavens, and the ground began to tremble beneath their feet. And then, babies began to fall from the sky, 10 of them, drifting gently like feathers as they descended from the clouds above. Everyone opened their eyes in shock, too stunned to move or say a word. The babies drifted down from the sky and landed gently around Ndidi, forming a perfect circle around her as she opened her eyes and mouth in shock. The entire village stood still as they watched the babies surround Ndidi, who knelt on the ground stunned to see herself surrounded by babies. Filled with so much terror, the villagers scampered, screaming and shouting that the gods had cursed their beloved land. Witch! Witch! Some cried. This is not a blessing. This is doom. Others yelled as they ran back into their huts and locked their doors. Everyone stood by their windows and watched as Ndidi remained kneeling in the midst of the strange babies. Suddenly, a loud cry was heard. It was the cry of Ndidi's child, who had just come back to life. Ndidi could not contain her joy. She's alive, she said repeatedly, as her husband rushed to her side, falling on his knees as he kissed both his wife and the baby. They both looked at the strange babies and felt a peace that they had never felt before. Ndidi, in that moment, decided to keep the babies.
These children are a blessing to us. They are the answers to our lifelong prayers, and I believe we should keep them.
She said to her husband Tochi, who could not help but agree. One by one, they took all the babies into their small hut and laid them gently on a mat, and the babies all drifted into a very deep sleep. The house was quiet, unlike what Ndidi had expected. Feeding and caring for the 11 babies were less stressful than she had anticipated, and Ndidi could not hide her gratitude. The night passed in silence, but by morning, the news spread across the village like wildfire. Ndidi had kept the sky babies, and the elders could not fathom it. The chief priest of the village was so furious as he believed the children were evil. These are no ordinary children, he warned, revealing that the children fell from the heavens during a storm of darkness. He called it an omen, and the people clamored for the babies to be sent away, but Ndidi refused.
They are my good luck charms.
She told them boldly, revealing that she called on the heavens and the heavens answered.
I have suffered loss 10 times over. These children came with life. How can they be evil?
She asked the villagers, who were not willing to hear what she had to say. All they wanted was the sky babies out of their village, but Ndidi was not willing to allow that happen. Her husband, too, vowed to protect the babies with all that he got. That evening, the entire village gathered in front of Ndidi's house, determined to take the babies away. As they approached the house, the skies began to grow dark as the people fell into a very deep sleep. All the warriors and villagers who had gathered in front of their house were now asleep. Ndidi stood by the window and watched as the villagers lay on the floor asleep. Ndidi turned to her husband in amazement.
Could it be the children protecting us?
She asked her husband, who turned to stare at the babies, who were all sleeping peacefully on the mat. Hours passed, and the people finally woke up from their deep sleep. They stood there confused, as they could not understand what had happened. The skies remained dark, and the people were now filled with terror. They believed that their gods were against them, as crops stopped growing and the rivers slowed to a trickle. No fire stayed lit for more than a few minutes, and each day passed under a blackened sky. The chief priest called for a meeting at the village square. He told the people that the babies were not ordinary babies. They are evil spirits, and until they are cast out, will never see the light of day again. Fear spread like wildfire, and the villagers decided to get the babies out of their village. They lit some sticks on fire and threw it at Ndidi's house, but the house did not burn. Only the sticks burned out, and the people could not understand what was happening. They labeled Ndidi and her family witches and did everything within their power to stay away from them. Ndidi, however, remained home with her babies. She noticed that the 10 babies were now growing at an unusual speed, unlike her daughter, who remained small like a baby. A week passed, and the 10 babies had now grown into adults. Ndidi and her husband did not know what to make of it. All they knew was that the sky babies were peaceful and meant no harm to them. Ndidi did all she could to speak with them, but the sky babies, now adults, did not say a word to her. She watched in stunned silence as the sky babies stood by the window and watched. They stood there every day, silent, still, watchful. They did not eat, they did not sleep, they never blinked, just watching, as though waiting for someone. The villagers, now living in absolute terror, spoke in whispers. No one dared to pass by Ndidi's house. Even the birds stopped flying over their compound, and still the sky remained black like thick ink. Then, on the 13th day, something happened that shook the villagers to their marrow. All the children in the village slumped to the ground unconscious. Their parents, terrified to the bones, wept as they blamed the sky children for all that had happened. Panic took over the village as mothers screamed and fathers tore their shirts in grief. Children of all ages, healthy just moments before, lay limp, eyes shut as their breathing became slow and shallow. They have cursed our children, the villagers cried, claiming that the babies had finally unleashed evil upon the children. All eyes turned again to Ndidi's house, where the sky children, now adults, stood silently and watched. One of the mothers, whose 4 children were now unconscious, spoke up and called the sky children cursed. She insisted that the evil children be sent out of the village to enable their own children to live, and though others agreed with her, no one dared to approach the house. The woman, whose name was Awele, summoned the courage to approach. She knocked on the door, and her hands trembled as she stood by the entrance, her heart pounding like drum in her chest. The moment her knuckles touched the wooden door, it creaked open on its own, and the 10 sky babies, now adults, walked out of the house for the very first time. She stood there terrified as she watched them walk down the streets of the village. Several other villagers trailed after them from a distance as they wondered where they were going. The sky babies, now tall adults, moved slowly and with purpose. Ndidi watched from a distance, frozen, as they headed down the narrow path that led to the shrine of the chief priest. The whispers in the village rose as doors creaked open, heads peeked out, and soon the entire village began to trail behind them. The shrine sat at the edge of the village, surrounded by thick crooked trees that never bore fruit. Vultures always circled overhead, even when nothing dead was in sight. Strange sounds often came from within, sounds the villagers had learned to ignore, but on this day, the people could not help but stand curious. They watched in stunned silence as the sky children surrounded the chief priest's shrine. Everyone wondered why they were there, but what they did not know was that the chief priest was the one behind all the strange things that had been happening in the village. His twin brother, who was supposed to become the chief priest of the village, died mysteriously years ago, despite all he did to save him. So, the chief priest was left with no other option but to take on the role of the chief priest of the village. However, he could not stand being the chief priest. He had always wanted to live a normal life, a life which would allow him marry as many women as he wanted. The chief priest was such a promiscuous man who could not stand the life of celibacy that he was supposed to lead as the chief priest of the village. For all these years, he was the one behind all the miscarriages that Ndidi had suffered in almost 10 years. He was a serial rapist who defiled the women that came to him. Whenever he defiled the woman, he pledged an unborn baby as sacrifice. The chief priest pledged so many babies to save himself from ever facing the consequences of his actions. Ndidi and several other women in the village lost their babies because of him. However, on that fateful day, when Ndidi was bringing life into the world, the spirits tried to take the child but couldn't because the child belonged to the chief priest. Months ago, when Ndidi could not stand the thought of losing another child, she paid the chief priest a visit for help, and the chief priest gave her something to drink that rendered her unconscious. He made his way with her, not knowing that it would lead to pregnancy. So, when he was about using her 11th child on that fateful day, the skies turned black as the spirits rejected his offering. Instead of power, the sacrifice triggered the return of the spirits of the children he had killed. The sky babies were sent back to prevent the chief priest from killing all the children in the village. As the villagers watched from a distance, the 10 sky children, now adults, formed a perfect circle around the shrine as the ground beneath their feet began to shake. The chief priest emerged from within the shrine, his face filled with rage as he yelled for them to leave. "Leave this place now!" he screamed as the sky children said nothing. They simply raised their hands towards the sky, and lightning struck down from the heavens. Thunder clapped, louder than anything the villagers had ever heard, as the trees around the shrine began to catch fire. The earth opened slightly under the chief priest, and a deafening wind blew through the village as the spirits returned to judge him for all the atrocities he committed. Suddenly, the sky babies began to speak. "You fed your greed with the blood of the innocent. You corrupted the heavens with unholy rituals. You stole life, and now life rejects you." The villagers fell to their knees trembling. The chief priest dropped his staff and began to plead for mercy, but the sky children shook their heads, and then in one swift motion, they raised their hands again. The shrine shook violently, crumbling as it sank into the ground, swallowed like a pebble in water. The chief priest screamed as dark smoke engulfed him. His body did not fall. It vanished, turned into dust, blown away by the wind. For the first time in 13 days, the sun broke through the clouds, and in that same moment, the unconscious children across the village opened their eyes and began to sit up, confused but unharmed. Their parents rushed to them as they thanked the sky babies for saving their lives. And with that, the 10 sky babies turned, facing the rising sun as they began to walk towards the forest. As they walked, their bodies shimmered like glass, catching the light until they were completely gone. Not dead, not vanished, just gone. Only Ndidi's baby remained. The villagers regretted their actions, realizing that they had feared what was sent to save them. From that day on, the village of Uturu changed forever. The shrine was never rebuilt. The land grew fertile once again, and Ndidi was honored as the mother of hope. As peace finally returned to the village, Ndidi sat quietly as her newborn daughter slept in her arms. The chaos had passed, and the village was slowly healing. Her husband Tochi approached her, his eyes resting on the baby who had survived the greatest storm the village had ever seen. And for a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a trembling voice, he reached out and touched the baby's cheek. She is ours, Ndidi, he said as tears poured down his eyes. I don't care whose child she is. All I see is my heart in hers. I accept her as mine, as ours, as heaven's final gift to us. Ndidi looked him in the eyes and smiled as tears dropped down her face. In that moment, she vowed to protect their child with all that she got. The lesson to be learned from this story is that fear often blinds us to the blessings we are given. What we do not understand, we quickly condemn, forgetting that sometimes the most miraculous answers come clothed in mystery. Always remember that judging by appearances can lead us to reject what is sacred. Most importantly, what is sent to save us may not always look the way we expect. Ndidi was mocked, rejected, and called cursed, yet she was chosen to carry the very hope that would save the village. The sky babies were a divine response to her cries, but the people, in their ignorance and fear, nearly destroyed the very thing meant to deliver them. I hope you enjoyed this.
Do not forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on your notifications so that you will be notified whenever a new video is dropped. Thank you.